Good afternoon, dear participants. Today we have geopolitical talks, and we had only a few events. So that is the third talks we have on geopolitics, but nevertheless, to we would like to continue because my colleagues in Ukraine Crisis Media Center, they say that we have to continue because there are lots of questions, the issues, external, internal. Of course, we have the war, and all of us are following the events on the front line and what is going on in the country to enhance the institutional capability. But nevertheless, we have already discussed these, and I'm getting only more sure that we have to speak about the broader questions, broader issues, which will allow us to understand what do we have this war for? What world and country are we building? What is going to have an impact on our development and on our security? And actually, these topics are there are lots of platforms which are discussing these issues, and I have to say that I'm participating or watching the international platforms, but in Ukraine we had a few events like that. So that is my personal opinion, but I think that many people share my idea. The intellectual platform and the professional platform for the security discussions is the Kyiv Security Forum of Arseniy Yatsenyuk, that was headed by the famous diplomat and activist Danylo Lubkivsky, who is in this room with us today. But I think that we are going to discuss not only this, because it's a very interesting topic, because you had an event, a very special event, with very interesting with General Petraeus, the former head of CIA, the person who knows about the special operations, not from the books, and we heard not only American side, but what is more important for me, I have to say that it's not that often that you can see on one event, on the special event, the representatives of the Ukrainian government, the secretary of the Security Council of Ukraine, Danilov, that is a high level when we are talking about the security. The deputies from the parliament, from different fractions, the representatives of the Ministry of External Affairs, the Ministry of Defense. I've seen there was Ukrainian intelligence as well. They were listening to the expert, and we have the experts or the professionals who you constantly see, but you have never seen them discussing something with the government. So I think that that is a unique case, and in the triangle of two, let's say, not opponents, but competitors, internal issues, external issues, and I heard some really interesting new ideas. So before we move to the broader issues, taking account that we had the chance to say a few words and you were moderating the entire event, I felt that the moderator has something to say. Not only very interesting and professional questions which were forming this discussion, and I think that it would be interesting to listen to your replies, because, or maybe something about what was said, because you have a diplomatic experience and now you are moderating the Kyiv Security Forum since 2007. And the question is, we had lots of different topics on the meeting, but what is your impression comparing to the annual event, and now you have special event, like comparing to the previous event. What are the moods inside the country regarding the targets and the timeline? And what are do you think there are the changes in the level of preparedness of the country? So when General Petraeus is saying, of course, Ukraine will prevail and we will help, and then he says, but, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the former representative says he I do not agree with him, but he said, but means in American way, it means that, but means that the opinion is absolutely opposite. So you, as a person who was preparing the questions, did you see any kind of changes? Thank you very much, dear colleagues. Thank you for inviting me. To answer this main question, I would make the short introduction because, first of all, I would like to thank Valeriy and Ukraine Crisis Media Center for the invitation to participate in this practice of geopolitical dialogues, talks, if I'm correct with the format of this event. So I think that it's a very good and interesting initiative. In Kyiv Security Forum, we respect this your approach. That's a very good thing when you're that's very good when you're inviting the experts, the specialists in different spheres to discuss the external policy and also geopolitical challenges. And I would like to say that despite everything, or maybe thanks to everything, we are going through a real boom of initiative which are working with the external policies. We have for the first time, maybe not for the first time, but now it is at most obvious since we got the independence, this kind of variety and broadness of the structures or organizations who are working in this direction and giving their comments, even though even this number is not enough. Therefore, I would like to thank for the invitation and thank you Ukraine Crisis Media Center for developing the external policy environment, external policy thoughts that are forming our ambitions, our interests, and understanding of what is going on in the world. So that is a powerful growth, and I really like that a lot. I would like also to thank you for the kind words about the Kyiv Security Forum, and thank you for participating our special event, which was on the 5th of September 2023. Maybe our audience is already aware, but we have the principle of annual meetings, so to say gala concerts, but nevertheless we are constantly organizing special separate events, online discussions, and so on and so forth. So Kyiv Security Forum is functioning as without stops, as well as KBF and Ukraine Crisis Media Center. When the full-scale invasion of the Russian Federation in Ukraine happened, we did not stop, and we were communicating from these halls with our partners, with all our friends. We are in touch for many years. No matter whether they are the high-ranked diplomats or the partners in different fields. The event of the 5th of September is unique because it combined a few, I would say, important and even strategical topics. We actually called it Spotlight Front and Restoration. And the event itself, where we had two moderators, in fact, that was Arseny Yatsenyuk and me, participated in this event as moderator as well. And we had, in fact, three key discussion. The first discussion was around the situation on the front line and perspective, where General Petraeus and Alexei Danilov participated. The second discussion, I think that the head of the Kyiv Security Forum said it well. Kabev shows the leadership when we are drawing the attention to this. When we are talking about the confiscation of the Russian sovereign actives and also the plans of restoration and the participation, and this discussion was participated by but very respected experts, Larry Sarmans, the former expert of finance of the USS, and the professor emerita of Harvard University. That is a really huge figure in this field. And of course, the thoughts of Philip Zelikov were very valuable, the former assistant deputy of the U.S. government, and his colleague Rutnaker, who was representing Washington, and also our former Minister of Finance, Ms. Yaresko, participated in this discussion. The third discussion, which actually closed this event and allowed to combine these two components with our reality, that was the component with Valeriy and also the other participants. Every panel was unique, was interesting, with interesting thoughts. And if you need a brief answer or to briefly explain what was important for me yesterday, on the 5th of September, I would say that, first of all, when we're talking about the military issues, what I heard from Petraeus, there was one thing which I would like to believe is the most important, that Ukraine is capable to accumulate progress on the front line. Yes, Petraeus allows us to understand that the situation is complicated, that since the Second World War, nobody had seen this kind of front line which the Russian Federation built on the occupied territories, but nevertheless, Ukrainian armed forces, first of all, they are holding this line. They do not allow them to concentrate in some specific part of it, and moreover, we have the chance, according to General Petraeus, to achieve, taking into account those gradual progress on the front line. Maybe it's not that obvious as it used to be in 2022. On the basis of these results, we are able to achieve some breakthrough which will allow us to achieve bigger success in the future. So I'd say that in the words of Petraeus, I heard the recognition of the bravery of Ukrainian armed forces and Ukrainian nations, and understanding how difficult is this fight, that it's not too much optimistic, but nevertheless he had a clear idea that Ukraine is capable to accumulate the progress and achieve bigger success. Plus, he said about F-16. Well, he said that he actually thinks that we will discuss it, I think, later, that if we're talking about the political decisions which would have allowed Ukraine to achieve a better success, we have to make them faster, we have to make them more. And he was not a person who is just explaining the logics of administration or the US government, but he was a critics of the Biden administration when he was saying that we need more decisions which will support Ukraine. That is on what Petraeus has said. Regarding the panel which was dedicated to the confiscation of the Russian assets. First of all, we have to understand that that's one of the key topics for our national interest, and of course the sovereign Russian assets. And now we are talking about around $300 billion dollars, which are frozen on the bank accounts of the EU and the US. That these sum is not able to compensate all those damages which were caused by the Russian Federation. But this money has to be used as a part of the plan of restoration of Ukraine. And there were a few very important things in this speech. What are the consensus for Larry Summers and for Zelikov and for other colleagues who they wrote the article in The Economist on why do we have to make the political decision on the confiscation of the Russian assets. So their position is that we need the political will to resolve this issue. There are no grounds, and they are actually breaking all the myths which are saying that we should wait for I don't know why, and then we are able to use this money. But they are against all these myths, and they say very simple things. First of all, we need the political will to confiscate the assets. Because when the Russian Federation show the aggression, they have no immunity for the prosecution. We can explain it in different ways from the point of view of legislation. The second thing is we need to understand on the mechanism on how this has to happen. Being afraid of the situation when we have so-called de-dollarization and similar things, I think that is ridiculous, and we should not pay attention to that. To justify the fact of this money being frozen and not using this money is not actually relevant, because this money is already ready to work in the interests of Ukraine, and moreover it will take away the burden which we have on the budgets of the countries which are supporting Ukraine. And the final point, each of them in different ways, but they are saying that it is the important role belongs to the European Union, and the format of and the decision which will be made or by the European Union or by the European countries, and the way how we are going to use these assets depends on their decision. At the same time, on this panel, I've heard one more thing. The thing, I think I will use it as to explain the final ideas of the Kyiv Security Forum. So what I've heard that they are worried, they're concerned. And if we look on the general picture of a political picture, we are in the eye of the hurricane. The hurricane which is happening now can become bigger. And this threat of the global picture and the tendency to getting worse, it is obviously felt, and therefore we need not only to support, in the opinion of Petraeus and the other participants who were with us online or offline, they say that we need not only to support Ukraine, not only to make the decisions, the political decision faster, and to express our political the political will. On the other hand, in their words, I found that they understand how difficult, how complicated is the situation not only of Ukraine but of the world. And depending on the actions which the European countries will undertake now, the future might change. Thank you very much. It is always great to hear briefly all the key ideas of the forum, and I think that different things might happen during the event, but nevertheless, that is actually obvious that we feel that the difference, and on this point, I would like to move to another questions, and I did not prepare them separately, but nevertheless, I would like to discuss the tendencies, the trends we can face in the next half a year. Of course, we cannot look over the horizon because as the forecasts, because as the history of the forecast shows, it doesn't work. So we have. I have on my table, I have lots of books with the forecasts which did not come true, but nevertheless, every forecast gives us some new ideas to think over. So I would like to ask you the following question. So I feel that there are two main trends, or we can say two tracks. The first one says that the policy of deterioration will prevail. So how can we see that? Deterrence policy. So not in fact when it's announcing the preventive actions, so they have their concept has changed. The prevention policy. So when they understood what has happened in Ukraine and how fast all these crimes were committed in Ukraine against the civilians, and now the countries which border on the Russian Federation and also the Baltic countries, they want to have more military components in the countries. And for example, they are asking the military bases, the nuclear weapons, and they wanted to prevent any further actions from the side of the Russian Federation. And this concept of prevention, it starts working, and therefore we have the bigger number of trainings. Now we have two big trainings and 40,000 NATO servicemen are going to participate that, so therefore the prevention works in this way. But when we are talking about the war of the Russian Federation against Ukraine, still we have the policy of deterrence. So it means that we are responding the situation. So we are trying to show what will be the consequences, and as a result, when something will happen, we will act. But we will do our best not to have the conflict on our territories. And we can see this case on the territory in the case of Romania, and it is already proved that these Shahed drones attack, not falling down. Well, that's only the part of the satellite can fall down. That is a thing which can fall down, but these things, they are striking the territory of Romania. I don't know whether that was an accident or not an accident. That's not the question. But the Romania, and they actually reacted in the concept of the U.S. and also the NATO countries. They said nothing has happened, but the next day, the clever Romanian advisors said that in this way, Romania is endangering itself, because NATO will not help them when the Russian Federation will attack Bucharest, and therefore they have changed their opinion, and the president of Romania, Goliath, and the Minister of Defense, and now they have the serious question, what do we do? And that is the prevention policy which failed in this case. The similar thing we see in the US. Constantly, we can say that the US has similar situation. They do not want to have the direct conflict with the Russian Federation. They can do that through NATO or through the European Union, and they support Ukraine. So that is also the prevention, that is a policy of deterrence, so that this policy was quite effective, but it was resultative after 4 decades, and we do not have 4 decades to resolve this issue. And the second concept is the policy of prevention, to undertake the prevention steps to show the enemy that they are going to prevent something, but they want to show their capability now and here. And in this concept, for example, now we can see that we finally have the trainings, as far as I understand, that is Sea Breeze, Bulgaria, Republic of Turkey, Ukraine, and the other is close to Dunai. So maybe there are not going to be the warships, but they would be the ships which are going to demine the sea. So NATO has actually everything, and they are using that. So that is a first signal. That is my personal opinion. But I have seen how people hoped that having the US jet or the warship in the Black Sea, that is something which that will not allow the Russian Federation to achieve. But now we can see that that Ukraine is cutting this elephant in pieces. But we started with the trunk and the tail. But we need also to cut the ears, and we will manage that as well. But these warship, they disappeared right before the full-scale invasion. Was it just an accident? No, that was not an accident. They just wanted to prevent the war, but nobody is guaranteed that the war will not happen. So there are two concepts. Of course, they are much broader. We can say about the deterrence as the prevention, or being wise, or you can evaluate it in 2 different ways. So there are 2 concepts, brief concept. The first one is offensive, even though it is defensive, but we can say that the means it uses can be more effective, and also offensive and defensive. So now let's not talk about the forum, but about you. What is your personal opinion when we compare what was done before, since 2014, then after the full-scale invasion of the Russian Federation in Ukraine? So what are the concepts? What concepts prevail now, and what will prevail? So what will happen in the next year, till the summer 2024? And what would you say is, what do you think, in your opinion, what track would be more successful? Thank you. Well, I think that the response of alliance to the events in Romania, as far as I remember, or the general Secretary General, or NATO, or someone from the Secretariat, that NATO does not consider and cannot see any kind of intention from the Russian Federation to show aggression against the alliance state. The Secretary General said that they do not see the motives of the attack of the Russian Federation. Yes, and in this phrase, in my opinion, you can see the controversivity of the situation which we have in the framework of alliance, and of course it affects the position of Secretary General on how he considers these actions of the Russian Federation. Of course, we have the general concept on how we evaluate it. First of all, we have the general concept on how we support Ukraine, on how we react to the provocations of the Russian Federation. But still, we have lots of situations when this position of NATO becomes controversial, or when they have to express thoughtfulness, the thing which does not allow us to make the solid decisions, and we have to talk about it. So in fact, we are the witnesses of two big historical facts. The first one is that there has never been in the history of Ukraine when the alliance has supported Ukraine that much. All the Western countries are united, and that's not only the words, but that are the actions, that are the money, and that are the resources. In fact, we are the part of the Western society, and that is already a fact. Without the support, of course, we do understand that we would have faced more bloodshed, and we do understand that maybe there would have been different forms of this aggression. So we are the witnesses of the unprecedented fact of the support of the West against the barbaric attack of the Russian Federation. On the other hand, we do understand that, and that's actually the issue which was announced on the Kyiv Security Forum, because every next step of the support is conducted in the way like the next portion is provided. So that is a political calculation which is explained to us as the need for thoughtful actions not to allow the escalation of the situation with the Russian Federation. In my opinion, this kind of approach is mistake. And I have my personal arguments. Why do I consider this approach to be a mistake? And I think that all of us share the same idea about it, because we do understand that this political thoughtfulness is provoking aggressor, is motivating aggressor, and it does not stop them. And what if the reason for this is different? We do see that the Russian Federation was threatening the nuclear weapon if we touch the autonomous Republic of Crimea, and now we have the special operations in our Ukrainian autonomous Republic of Crimea. And I think that we have to forget all these threats because it's fake and no ballistic missiles will reach us. But maybe we don't know something. Maybe the People's Republic of China, maybe they promise to provide them more and directly. Maybe it's not weapons, but something else which they need in big quantities. Maybe there are some shade talks, because we do understand that there is the contact between the US and the RCP. Maybe there is some reason for that. So I'm trying to consider myself. So it's been 1.5 years that the situation is changing, but why approach is not changing? Thank you very much for this question, because I was actually preparing for this, because I wanted to draw attention to this fact. I would like you to consider, is there an X factor which we can have guesses about, but which is not that obvious to become obvious for Ukrainians and experts? Maybe that X factor can be some internal. So there is some certain argumentation of the Biden administration on the logics of their actions, which is based on the internal political ideas, or maybe that is the number of the political factors which are related to other regions of the world. But before I come to this question, I would like to answer your previous question on the key trends which we can observe and which can have an effect on the general concept of our Western allies. So I think that we have a few challenges. The first challenge is, of course, and here I think that we have to start discussing not external situation, but internal. I think that our main threat is our internal being tired. So we are getting tired, and that's absolutely natural. But nevertheless, this threat is not becoming less dangerous. So we are tired of this cursed war, and this is a very good background for fights, for separation in the society, and for someone to be able to create some parallel reality to divide Ukrainian society, and that is what I would say has an impact on the internal mobilization of the society. And I think that we need to preserve it. I think we need to preserve the national unity, and we need to do everything for the society to be sure that the society is sure that the governance is acting well. Because if the government is not showing the good example, the example of the real unity, not the faked one, but the real one, because the government is the flagman of the defense and the creation of the environment for the protection. Therefore, that's a very serious, that is a very big problem. The problem which the government, both government and Ukrainian political, have to be serious about, because being tired is very dangerous. It creates the grounds for the separation in the society and also concerns. And these concerns will lead to the conflicts with our Western partners. That is what the Russian Federation wants. And therefore, these long-term, in this case, long-term strategic thinking is a basis for the next steps. The second aspect is that we are going to be told that the West is tired of supporting Ukraine. They are going to do that because that matches our internal depression, which we are feeling. But for example, Rostislav Pavlenko has on Facebook, he has posted the information about the last surveys conducted by the Euro Commission on the moods of the citizens of the European countries. So there are no concern that the European countries support us, because we have more than 80% of the readiness to support Ukraine, to provide the resources, the weaponry, and even to participate refugees or Ukrainian migrants. But the other thing is that we can say that any kind of survey in this sphere is more the issue of what do you choose? Because the numbers can vary, but the general mood, so the general tendency to support Ukraine is obvious. And the same thing we can say about the US, and we can say that the support and it's sufficient, and it being sufficient or not sufficient is going to be the key one of the president election campaign, which is going to determine the landscape in the future. It's very important that it's very important for the US citizens to understand that, because you are speaking of the supporting Ukraine and or not supporting Ukraine, but I can see two topics which are competing. The first one is this, whether the Biden administration is providing sufficient support, and even these and even Madam Warren, who was actually who was, by the way, the candidate for the president, is suing Musk because he is trying to decide. He was switching off his Starlink, which was not finalized, and which is actually made on the with the on the by the money of the taxpayers in the US. And we can see him as someone like incredible, but in fact he's a person who is just doing the order of the US society. So in the book which was presented today, please remind me the author of the bestseller about Steve Jobs, the one who is okay, I cannot remember him, but there is a part about it, and it is mentioned there that Elon Musk had said it clear. He himself did it. So he helped the Russian Federation to attack Ukraine. And here we have the question, the second narrative. So first you said to support or not to support Ukraine, and how to support Ukraine. So it would have been great to have competition who will help Ukraine more, Republicans and the Democrats, so they would be competing who will give more to Ukraine. But there is another track. Why do you need to support Ukraine? And here Musk said, I am the US citizen. Why are you blaming me? So the second track is becoming more popular, not only in the US. And actually that is the position of politicians is different from the position of the citizens. So I would say the part of the politicum. And these two tracks, there are two tracks, not one. Yes, of course. And I think that we have even more tracks here, but the key thing is that we have to understand that on the almost second year of the war, the support of Ukraine is the mainstream idea, not only for our neighbors, despite all the changes, political changes, even despite all the challenges which they are facing in Poland and in the Czech Republic and the others, in Romania, which is actually a very active support of Ukraine. And if we're talking about the Central Europe or the US, so the mainstream is still there, but in the framework of this mainstream, and that is actually the second cluster I would like to mention. The first cluster, the first level, is our internal depression, which can become the good environment for different fights, for misunderstanding and similar things. And the second cluster is that we have to understand that the mainstream idea of supporting Ukraine is not something stable, because in the political affairs nothing is stable. So on the other hand, nothing is doomed in the political environment. That is the other side of the same coin, but nevertheless, we have to understand that we are coming to the new stage. We are obviously on this stage, and this stage requires. So, if to say we are not able to change the history and the balance of powers, we can have an impact on this situation with our own efforts. And here I would like to talk more about these two. So in fact, we are on the stage which we should have prepared for long time ago, but nevertheless we have to come to this stage. We have to mobilize more more units, which we call the international. Let's not call it front. It's important thing, but it's not the front. Yeah. So no doubt. So I think that everyone who is watching us carefully, you'd understand that when we are using this word, we do not want to express our misunderstanding of the situation on the front, but on the but in the diplomatic environment, we need the mobilization of units. So I think that we do not have the efforts which are undertaken now are not enough, and all the values we have to come to the next stage. What does it mean? So it means that on the international in the international field, we need to have the system. We need to educate the staff. We need to have the social expert. That is the cooperation between the so expert environment and society to create the narratives and narratives which we have to use in the West. And if in some of the stages we could have used some very tough rhetorics, narratives, now we have to consider it, and we have to look for the narratives which are well understood by our Western partners to mobilize their societies and the narratives which will not make them allergic to our situation, but which will make them support us. So the second cluster is the work with our Western allies. I call it, by the way, and we actually used this word during this special event of the Kyiv Security Forum as the formula of cooperation. So now we have a very big negotiations on the peace formula, Zelensky's peace formula support. Of course, this is a very important thing, but I think that Ukraine actually needs the ally formula, because depending on our actions, I would not dive into details, but depending on how we act and what are our next steps, we are in this way where we can it has an effect on our future, because the volumes of the assistance might change. So I didn't want to interrupt you, but the question of definitions. So you and here we have different opinion, and I would like to ask your opinion, because you are calling it a diplomatic front. So we have another phrases which are even further from these. So we call it cultural front, or we can see that the concerts, or for art front, or sports front. That is maybe Invictus Games, where the people with amputation are fighting on the sport competition. So we have alliances, allies. So we can talk about the allies as the attitude, or the political attitude or behavior. So Ukrainian Ukraine is allies with the United Kingdom. Who will be against it? Nobody. But in fact, we have no real allies. According to the international law, or according to the rules of the international cooperation. So being allies means when the war starts, your country, your army is ready to support your ally. And we have no such allies in the world. And therefore the guarantees. I'm also fighting for the correct definition of that. The security guarantees, which we will have to have in these ally agreements. Because if we had the ally agreements on the common protection and security, that would have been the guarantees for security. But we do not have nothing like that. So we are. So that is actually the sense, and that is I would like to ask you about. So the time is. I know that you're great diplomat and you're expert in geopolitics, but I would like to have a more dynamic end of our meeting. And now I'm very sorry for interrupting you. So actually, I don't want us to switch to another very important topic, the definitions, because when I'm talking about the formula of allyship, it's something that has a political partnership. So the terms which are used, like the security guarantees, of course, that are not the guarantees. But before we can admit it, we have to read all the documents which concern this question. But the sense is that the real guarantees of the security of Ukraine is the membership of Ukraine in NATO. And therefore, as for the other options, I would say that are the guarantees of the supplies and the support of our resistance to the oppressor. So I'm trying to end the question about the previous question. So about the X factor, which might have an impact on the logics and the actions of our partners. The point is that we have internal situation. The second thing is that we have the need for the new stage of the systemic actions to have the same level of support in Ukraine and have an impact on the society. And because our objective is very important, we need to move to the Washington NATO summit and once again, I will use here the political term to be sure that the doors of the alliance are open for us, and they are not going to be closed with a lock for us. And that is one very extremely important topic. And therefore, the third point is regarding the global picture. And the good illustration for this situation is the G20 summit in India, which has finished with the declaration with a well-known wording, even worse than the previous year. Yes, worse than the previous one. So this wording is protected very actively also by our U.S. partners, both by Secretary Antony Blinken and also the Joe Biden, President Joe Biden. And we can see that there is one more cluster of the problems. There is no state, no country in the world which would support the Russian Federation aggression. G20 show that all the members of this global union, they are not satisfied with the war continuing. The other thing is that some of them have their own interests, narrow or group interests regarding the Russian Federation, which grow into what we can see in India. And here we have one more interesting thing. So that are the relations in the triangle of the Western countries, mainly the US, India, and the People's Republic of China. On G20, there was no leader of the RCP, of course, no Putin, but nevertheless, on this summit, it was very clear and loud the specific position of India. And we can say that this vector of the cooperation with India, it's expressed also in what we can see soon. We will see the transport corridor, which will unite the Europe and India, which is an alternative to in the infrastructural projects of China, and also the complex of other actions which will open the new stage or the new international reality, the global international reality, where India becomes the factor which works against the Chinese hegemony. And how Washington is balancing these interests and trying to bring the Saudi Arabia and the other partners to their monochurch, and how they are motivating India, how they do not allow this hurricane we mentioned before to open. And that is also a very interesting third dimension of the tendencies we mentioned before. The X factor, which has an impact on the calculations, the political calculations in different capitals, and which is not that that obvious for us. The international relations is a very specific thing. The international relations, that is a sphere where you have astronomic objects which have an impact on gravitation, and the black holes are also these objects, and we do not want to have the black hole on our horizon, which will swallow us, all our hopes and all our intentions, big intentions. And by the way, that is also a very political term. It's not even the legal term. And therefore, finalizing my monologue, I would like to say that we are on this stage when we need additional internal concentration. First of all, intellectual concentration. So, of course, I'm not speaking of the heroic resistance of our armed forces of Ukraine. That is, of course, utmost important. So when we are talking about one front or many fronts, we have one front, the front which is the military front line. But we need the internal intellectual concentration on the fact that the internal depression will have an impact on the absence of integrity of the society, on the external affairs. And to the third, we have to be very careful watching the situation which is happening between the West and, sorry for this term, but it is used with the global South, for these relations not to have the black hole in these relations, which will have an impact on our life. Thank you very much. Very interesting ideas. Taking into account the dialogue, let me respond to you. So I wanted to speak about this space. I'm not going to do that, but the first topic, why would we like to have to discuss more topics? All of them are very important, and of course the institutional resistance. So you have spoken about the external work. It's not only diplomatic work, but if we call the word the things with the words, so I will just reformulate what you've said, rephrase it. The emotions do not help us to build something stable. On the emotions, so the emotions are fading, and the declarations are more and more pragmatic, and there is a tendency for that. So if we're talking just about the documents which are written now and before, of course you can protect some position, there is a resolution of the UN, but the thing is that the war is not at the tables of the Security Council, but it should have been there if everything would have been right. But it's in the minds of the people, and people do not see on the screens what is happening. They see what we are discussing. The things have became worse than they used to be the previous years. So something is happening, so everything is becoming worse. So the info world is like that. People are not going to deep dive into the details. So you and me, we do understand how it works. For the diplomat, every word matters, every comma matters. It is very important also for the lawyers, but not in this informational world, not in this informational environment. In this informational environment, I can see that what is happening now in Ukraine, and in this world, in this environment, some absurdist announcements are drawing attention from more important topics, and you know how it works. So I would say that it's clear for me that this trend on which we saw in Delhi means the shift of the interest. So the interest of the US on how to bring India closer to the US, and on the other hand, how to stop the People's Republic of China, because we do understand that that's new way, because there are countries which want to China to become the leader. There would be the group of these countries, and what shall we do with this? So in my opinion, that is, we will have these kind of format like we had before G20. We can see that everyone is dividing. The Russian Federation wants the worlds to separate and wants them to divide as they want. So they want to have the Russian Federation, China, and the US. But it is not going to happen. The Russian Federation is not going to be there. There is going to be China and the US. And then we have the question, where would India be? The biggest country with the nuclear weapon. But nevertheless, I can see our actions in the institutional mechanism. They do not match the challenges which you mentioned. We can talk a lot about diplomatic front, meaning the work of Ukrainian diplomats and their work in different directions. But at the same time, we have things which we cannot explain during the war. For example, the punishments, the assigning the ambassadors. So we do see these kind of examples. Now we can see the same story in media. So I'm not evaluating the work of Ukроборонпром defense company, but in the society there is ambiguous opinions. So what does it mean? Is it about the front line? No, it's not even about the good, sufficient diplomatic works. Therefore, I do not want to talk about the details. So people are tired, diplomats are tired. They are not only physically tired, but also they lack ideas. They have the political pressure from the institution which are according to our legislation and should have provided with more powers and authority. The parliament, which is not controlling anything. So the head of the committee of the parliament, they are trying to do something, Mereshko and Klempush Sensadze, but the parliament in general, they are not doing anything in the external, regarding the external policy. They are doing the announcements, but they are not. So as far as I understand, not all of them are even able to leave the countries for some international meetings. So yes, the government doesn't want to understand that the stage is already here, and we need not just to run, but we need at least the bicycle to use to reach our objectives. So we will have the topic, the issue of the institutional capability, the effectiveness of the coordination of the government, president, and the other actors. And one voice outside on these questions. So there are lots of issues which have always been there, but now during the war, they are utmost obvious. You have to use this argument for the victory of Ukraine, or it makes you vulnerable. And therefore, I totally agree with you. I would have suggested right now the next appointments of the ambassadors of Ukraine to appoint the people, the professional diplomats, or at least the people who have this country and who worked with external affairs and who have experience in negotiations. So there are the cases when for example, the ambassadors, they worked with the ministries of finances, and she was not the diplomat, and we have to appoint the people from these categories. So how to have an impact on the president's decision. So we need the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to appoint only the professional diplomats, and then it was going to be the responsibility of the president of Ukraine, because this person has chosen someone who has no relation to the diplomatic field, because I can see that these appointments are considered the same way as the people in the government. So that is a person that should be the person who knows the languages, who have the experience. By the way, the person who passed the exam. And by the way, we passed actually the exams in the Ministry of the Foreign Affairs on language, on the knowledge of the country. So before going to the US as an ambassador, I have passed an exam. So I doubt a lot that people know they actually have the exam. So we need to request from the government for the ambassadors in the other countries to be the professional diplomats. And the other thing is that we have to have the common mechanism of coordination of the government with president, with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And as for the external voice and the coordination of the work we have discussed, I think it's not relevant at all. And actually, I started with your forum because it is at least a small example on how the government, not the opposition, but opponents, can work on some common position. Idea. And what is also very important, and we have already discussed that, and me and I think you as well are criticized for the question whether we are allowed to criticize our partners and allies. That is a weird question. Of course, we have to do that, but you have to do that from this height of trust between your partners, strategic partners, or from this height. And this height, which we have to use to get everything that our country needs to prevail. And me, as well as your forum, will request the faster Thomas Rikitaris, the platforms for launching and also F-16. We will request that. We have to do that. During the war of your country, of your nation, you cannot just be begging something from your partners, but on the contrary, you have the trust. You have to do that from the position of trust. You have to do everything your best for the partner to trust you, and therefore there should be no corruption. This word has to disappear when we are talking about the weaponry, and I think that there is a huge threat for that in the next month. And so if the question of the weaponry supplies and the corruption will be related. So I think that Zelensky has actually made a good point that corruption has to have nothing in common with the corruption and the weaponry supplies. So that is what they are going to target. And therefore, you have almost answered the third part, that the world is actually separating and not uniting. But the last question in this discussion is, I heard that you are writing the book, and you are writing something about David and Goliath, and all of us know that the fight between David and Goliath, it's not the main thing that someone has power or not. There is Jews and Philistines who had weaponry, but the God is important in this case. But I would like to ask about this issue and related to this myth. So now all of us are saying that we need the technological weaponry, and then there would be no asymmetry between the Russian Federation and Ukraine, and we will prevail. And Ukraine, as far as I understand, is continuing the war which they started in the Soviet times. So Putin is showing to everyone that, in my opinion, that is that war. The war which should have happened if in the 1990s the Soviet Union did not collapse. This war could have happened that time with those tanks, and they are already bringing these old tanks to the war. And in that war, the number of tanks, the number of people, the number of everything matters. And therefore, those myth about David and Goliath is not that direct. So the weak side is able to prevail over the strong one if the hand of God works well. Therefore, I have two questions. The first one, whether David will prevail or Goliath will prevail. And the second one is, can we actually compare the situation with this myth? Please. So now you can use as many times as you need. I'm not going to ask any question. Thank you very much. Thank you for this question. So I agree with your monologue. It's absolutely correct regarding the evaluation of what is going on in the framework of the diplomatic environment. And I think that we have the common idea on this, that despite all of these critics, so all we want is that we are respecting our colleagues, diplomats, who are doing incredible things in a very different situation, very difficult conditions. They are protecting our interests, and they are doing their best for Ukraine to be able to have the support of the world. And that is point number one and the most important. Ukrainian diplomacy has shown during these 2 years, and actually since 2014, 9 years. It's 9 years, and they have showed the acceptable experience. And I'm very proud of being diplomat as well as you, and I'm very proud of belonging to this profession. And I think that the things we've made during this time is really deserves to be proud of. But there are still the things we have to respond properly. So I think that there is one more important thing: to have systematic actions. Sorry for this analogy, but everything which is compared to the real frontline is actually questioned. But I think that this analogy is justified. So when we are saying that Ukrainian warriors have to be educated, and we need to use Western equipment, Western vehicles, F-16 and weapon, in the same way, we can say that in this competitive and very difficult, complicated, and often egoistic world, we need to achieve some success. We need to invest big efforts in educating the staff, because even now, Ukrainian diplomacy has to think not only about the stage we have started, the second stage of the resistance. If we can say that the first stage was the undoubted support, and then the second the second stage is fatigue, and then there would be the third stage, the next stage, the third stage, which we have to get prepared for. That is a stage of creation of the political environment for the Ukrainian restoration, and the new actions with by forecasting what is going to happen in the future. So we need to have good expertise in that. And my main recommendation also for our diplomatic services is to prepare not only what we need now, but what we will need tomorrow, on the day after tomorrow. And it's just not the play on words, that is just not the empty intention, but that are clear and thoughtful things which we start doing now. We have to prepare the stuff. We need the staff schools on the Middle East, on India, on China, on South East Asia, or maybe a Pacific Ocean or Africa. So we need this the schools which will prepare the well-educated staff, and in this case we will not have the situation when we will have to make the announcements, and when we will not hire the people who without experience. Sorry, but we do not have the school, special school. We do not have the school for Slovenia. It's not about the schools for stuff. I think that maybe we have to give to explain the heads of the country. So I can say that it's very important for the people to understand that it's not because we do not have the stuff. It's because we do not have the right political decisions. So you have said it correct, but also we need these political schools, and they have to be consequent, and we have to pay attention to that. I'm very sorry, I've lost my thought about the David and Goliath, so we will come to this question now, but because in fact, there are many things in the cooperation with the Ukraine Crisis Media Center and many other think tanks in Ukraine and abroad. When they cooperate, they can create the common understanding on how they can prepare for the next stages. By the way, I have to mention one more thing. The same thing we can say about the cultural diplomacy, because this diplomacy concerns empathy and the support from the other societies, and we cannot exist in the environment when the Ukrainian Institute, the main institution of Ukraine, which is responsible for popularization of Ukrainian culture abroad, which appeals to different institutions abroad, has no state financing. That is inappropriate. And when we are talking about the resources, these resources, that is investigation in our future. When we come to work with nations, which will lead to some political decisions, military decisions, and therefore I should have mentioned that. I needed to mention that. And to recap in everything, I have to say that we have to understand that it will last for a long time, and we need a long-term plan for the resources, and we also need the long-term planning for the future. And I remember that in 2019, during one of the lives, I was answering the journalist question. The journalist has asked me somewhere in the context of Davos, what are the priorities for our future development, in your opinion? So I said that is defense, and once again defense. And now when we are talking about our priorities, I would say that our key priority is long-term planning and the correct and the proper investment in the international support of Ukraine to make the cooperation formula make real. And as for David and Goliath, I would like to clarify, and thank you very much for doing this pass to me. The only thing I would like to clarify is that I'm taking it as a key for the explanation of the complex, difficult situation. I am taking the myth about Hierarchy and his 12 challenges, and I'm trying to express them in different ways. But any myth gives us the opportunity to find a good analogy. So if we speak about myth about David and Goliath, in this case, I truly believe that Ukrainian David will fight Goliath because that is the will of the God. But the other thing is that is due to the bravery of the young defender of the truth. And even though Goliath is very strong, David is always prevailing because this myth is not just a fairy tale. That is the nature of human being. And to preserve this energy, this strength of this David, who is able to fight Goliath, for this we need these internal intentions, and these intentions depend on how wise, how thoughtful would be the behavior of the government, and how thoughtful would be the behavior of the society. And the combination of these two components will lead to victory of Ukraine over the beast which is fighting us. Thank you very much. I have nothing to add here. The only thing I would like to say is that there are so many questions regarding the current situation and midterm steps. Maybe as a moderator, I was not able. I actually started to ask the questions which actually affect the situation. And as for the Goliath and David, thank you very much for explaining that this is going to be the book about Hierarchy and his 12 challenges. But in fact, in some of these myths, he was using the weapon in all of them. And David, despite the opinion that he was without the weapon, and he was saying that he has raised the stone, but he has killed Goliath with the sword. So still there was the Western weapon. There was a Western weapon there as well. So we actually didn't have the dialogue as actually planned it, but I saw that there is a potential for the discussion as opponents, and that is actually really good because in the strategic questions we have the common idea, and that's difficult to be opponents in this case. But on the strategic questions we have different opinions, but that will be on the next stage of the talks. Thank you, Mr. Minister. Thank you, Mr. Minister. Thank you for telling briefly for those who are not able to watch the entire day of forum, but you briefly explained what has happened. And now not only Ukrainians are watching us, but also abroad, and the translation was also in English. And I hope that those colleagues in those institutions who are subscribed for Ukraine Crisis Media Center in Ukraine and abroad, also in the ministries of defense and the ministries in the other ministries, and also the people, the citizens of different countries, they will take in account your ideas for their next programs and decision. Thank you very much for the organization of this meeting, and thank you for we had a bit longer meeting, but thank you very much for